We just want to jump right into conversation. I would like each of you to talk about what led you to work on this issue, and just opening remarks, about 5 to 7 minutes. And then Jane, I'll have you go last. Subha, I'll have you go last because I want you to talk about what led you to work with this group as a person of Bosnian background.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Mm-hmm. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for coming. In 1992, we started to hear reports as the former Yugoslavia was disintegrating into approximately 6 different countries at the time, of violence breaking out in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which most of us probably could not find on a map at the time if we were asked to. But what was important for us as a community was that most of the people living in Bosnia, most of the victims of these atrocities that were occurring happened to be Muslim. And a large number, upwards of 20 to 30,000 women, were specifically being targeted for by rape as a war crime. When this started happening, reports started coming out in the United States. Remember, this is 1992, before the internet, before social media. We're just hearing what the media reports. And one of the most striking things that came out was a picture on the cover of Time magazine of a man, emaciated, who looked like a concentration camp victim, standing at a fence, and he had been in a camp of Bosnians being held by either Serbian militia or Serbian military, and it brought back images of the Holocaust, and we all know that the refrain that came out of the Holocaust was, never again. And so people thought, this looks like it's happening again in Europe, in the 20th century. What is going on? Is this another genocide that's happening? And what could be done? A lot of women's groups were very concerned about what was happening and came to us in the Muslim community to find out what we were doing to help Muslim women who were being attacked and who were victims of these crimes. And at that time, we decided to form the Women's Coalition Against Ethnic Cleansing, which was basically interfaith and other women's organizations. And we decided that in order to understand what to do and how to help and who to support, we needed to go there. So a group of us, including Summer, myself, Subha, some others from different organizations, Lisa Watson, who was with the YWCA at the time, somehow connected with people there by telephone, by fax, no internet, you couldn't get an Airbnb, you couldn't make reservations with Hotels.com. It was all done just through that work. I had just started my medical practice, I had just given birth to our first child, but we felt that this was such an important issue that we had to do something. So we put a trip together and traveled to Croatia, actually, in 1993, and met with a range of groups and met with people who had been fleeing out of these camps. And so just my own personal reflection was really what effect that had on me. We met with women, they were staying in a refugee camp made out of, say, like dorms from the YMCA, YWCA. People would put up curtains in between them. There was very little privacy. We met with those who took testimony from people coming out of the camps, and you could see the trauma of the person who had experienced all kinds of violence, but also of the person taking the testimony. Even though she hadn't been in the camp with them, hearing one story after another had had such a traumatic effect on her as well. And everyone was thinking, what's the point of reliving this trauma? I don't even know if we had as much understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder then as we do now. So people had to re-experience trauma every time they told their story. But there was always this hope that if we document this, if we chronicle it, someday, somehow, justice will prevail in the form of the criminal court. So it was worth reliving. I also remember one of the people we met with was a physician. She happened to be the daughter-in-law of the president of Bosnia at the time, Alija Izetbegovic. And she told us the story of how she had been in the hospital, and one of the patients that came in was a Chetnik. That was sort of the derogatory term that the Bosnians used for the Serbian militia. Came in, and his life was in her hands, and she saved his life. Now, I'm a doctor too, and how dare I say something like, how could you save his life after all the atrocities he committed? And it was a moment of almost kind of shame for me when she said, well, I'm a physician, I'm a doctor, that's what we do. And sort of looking to that notion of our common humanity and what our role is in terms of saving lives, was an important lesson for me that I have never forgotten ever since then, because she could rise above this sectarian conflict to do her job as a physician to save this man's life. There were many other examples, but I think mostly just looking at the courage of the people and how they survived. But I will say on the issue of rape in particular, this was a really important factor, because there were reports that it was used as a tool or as a weapon because of the result it would have on the whole culture of the Bosnian community. Rape is always bad, but there was this perception that if you're a Muslim woman who's been raped, now you can no longer have a future, you can't have a life, you can't get married because you are contaminated or tainted in some way. So it was used to undermine the whole culture, and indeed some of the stories we heard were of these things happening in front of the family members. So it'd be emasculate the father or the brother, whoever, who could not save his wife or daughter from this atrocity happening right in front of them. So these are really horrific stories. And unfortunately, as much as there has been progress in terms of prosecuting some of the major criminals accused, whether it's Slobodan Milosevic, and you've seen over the years the reports and the drama at the court, or Karadzic, who was in hiding for a long time, or Mladic, there probably has not been as much prosecution of these lower level individuals who carried out these crimes against these women, who have suffered the consequences of it for these 25 years. So just looking at current footage and of these women who are still living with the scars, once these things happen, you can heal, but only so much. You're left sort of in a state of brokenness. And so the legacy of this war lives on, but I think that bringing attention to it, being there to speak out on behalf of these women who are affected, bringing women together from the United States who wanted to do something to help, what made it worthwhile. And it just reminded us that, as we see in present time, that these issues are ongoing, and they don't just happen once, but they recur in human history, and we continue to have to step up to do what we can to make a difference. So I think those are some of my... Oh, the last thing I just want to mention, just from the Islamic perspective. We met with, I believe, one of the religious leaders in Zagreb, and they were confronted by this issue of abortion, because one of the other things that sometimes women were told was that they were being forced to bear children of the Serbian militia, and that made it even worse, as bad as things were. And they basically issued a fatwa that said, under these circumstances, that Islamically speaking, abortion would be allowed. And it was a courageous thing for those religious leaders to do, because that's not necessarily what is agreed upon. As we know, that the sort of mainstream view is that only in cases where the woman's life is in danger, or life is threatened, is it allowed. The issue of rape and incest is something that's actually debated among the scholars. But they took the position that there was no debate, and to sort of protect their women, to save them, to give them some kind of comfort that if they made that choice, made that decision, then they would not at least have to worry that they would be sanctioned by the Islamic leadership at the time. And I really feel that that was an extremely forward-thinking way of supporting the community at a very, very difficult time for them.
What order did you want? Summer.
So I'm going to echo a lot of what Layla said, but I'll also try to have some original thoughts. But we had formed the Muslim Women's League, I believe, in 1992, just right when this war was starting. And so our first project as this brand new organization was the Bosnian rape issue and the Bosnian women. And our first big introduction was the Women's Coalition Against Ethnic Cleansing, which we spearheaded as a group of, 3 or 4 or 5 Muslim women who decided to form this organization to address our concerns as Muslim women within Muslim society in this country and understanding Islam itself. On a personal note, what led me to care so much about this? Twofold. The genuine fear of meeting my Lord on the day of judgment and God asking me, what did you do to save these people you saw dying on television? And me saying nothing. I did nothing. So on a on a very honest personal note, I did not want to burn in hell over the Bosnian people. And the Palestinians, knowing that my father and my uncle and all sorts of people beloved to me had fought for the Palestinians and basically, forgive me, lost. That I did not want that to happen to the Bosnian people. That if Serbia took over Bosnia, we were never going to see that land again. And we would spend 50 years or 100 years doing the same thing we're doing for Palestine. And I didn't want that to happen on our watch. And I think that was a huge impetus, that we could not relive the loss of Palestine. And in particular, the area, I was a law student at the time, so the area of rape being used as a weapon of war, of course, was nothing new. We had the rape of Nanking. Rape has always been used as a weapon of war. But this was actually advertised, that the Serbs were proudly proclaiming that rape was being used as a weapon of war, which for the Muslim women victims was a horror, not just because of the rape, but because of cultural views as to how they would be treated. And there were discussions in Saudi Arabia about how these women should be viewed. And they were, as you can imagine, the usual backwards Saudi views. So we needed to be there saying, this is not your fault, you are not to blame, Islamically you are blameless, and we hear you and we care about you. And we actually had t-shirts made that we sold as fundraising. And on one side they said in English, I am your witness, and on the other side they said in Bosnian, I am your witness. We sold these, we proudly wore them. I think we took a bunch with us, if I recall. So those were the things that were kind of foremost in our minds. In law school, I wrote a paper that rape needed to be recognized as its own specific war crime, because it is not in any of the well-known international law documents. So I thought we needed to spearhead this. I've not kept up on my international law since law school, but I believe rape is still not specifically recognized as a weapon of, as a human rights violation. You need to lump it in under torture. It is now. Okay, thank you.
I'm a professor from Michigan Law School.
Fabulous. Because at the time,